You see, darkness is now starting to rise, and my power has come back to me. You see, when the haze returned from the depths of the sea, and the spider came into the den, and I was offered anything a human man could desire. Causes for evil. But our cause is not for evil, Mulligan, because all we're looking is for refuge from this cold, cruel world. You see, this thing is backwards, Mulligan. Your family, along with Mike Graham, are the ones that are consorting, the ones that are out to put us out of business, whether it be in Daytona, Lakeland, Tampa, all over this great state and all over this great world.
Professional wrestling has always been a theater of extremes. Heroes and villains, blood and glory, spectacle and drama. But in the sun-soaked arenas of 1980s Florida, one faction emerged that blurred the lines between wrestling and ritual, spectacle and seance. Kevin Sullivan's Army of Darkness, birthed in championship wrestling from Florida, was not just a heel stable. It was a deeply atmospheric, horror-infused cult storyline that drew from real-world fears and occult symbolism, making it one of the most unsettling and groundbreaking acts in wrestling history. At a time when wrestling was still grounded in reality-based storytelling, Sullivan shattered the fourth wall, not by breaking kayfabe, but by embracing the cultural terrors of the era and bringing ritual horror, satanic symbolism, and mind control into the squared circle. His Army of Darkness became a storyline that wasn't just feared, it was believed. Kevin Sullivan was a Massachusetts native, an amateur wrestler turned professional who was known for his athletic ability and explosive energy in the ring. Early in his career, he was a straightforward babyface, a territory journeyman, and NWA mainstay. But by the early 1980s, Sullivan grew fascinated by psychology, the performative nature of villainy, and the moral nervousness that was sweeping the country known as Satanic Panic. Sparked by controversial books like Michelle Remembers and media coverage of alleged satanic ritual abuse cases, the nation was gripped by an irrational fear that occultism and devil worship were secretly infiltrating schools, daycares, and entertainment. News reports of black masses, alleged cults, and ritualistic crimes gave the public a sense that the occult was lurking in the shadows of everyday life. Televangelists like Pat Robertson and talk shows, such as Geraldo, fanned the flames, warning that Satanists were recruiting America's youth through rock music, Dungeons and Dragons, and even Saturday morning cartoons. It was in this environment that Kevin Sullivan realized he can use this real-life paranoia in professional wrestling. Instead of shying away from the panic, Sullivan leaned into it, crafting a character that seemed pulled from the headlines. A man possessed by darkness. In 1982, Sullivan started his new persona in championship wrestling from Florida. He adopted the moniker Prince of Darkness, shaved his eyebrows, painted strange symbols on his face, and spoke in riddles about evil deities that he followed like Abu Dadin and the Eyes of the Seven Moons. His cadence became trance-like, as though channeling some infernal power. As time passed, Sullivan would slowly add elements to his new presentation that would make those watching uncomfortable. Whether it was makeup, snakes, violence against women, or lynching of talent, Kevin Sullivan was developing his evil identity. While blurring the lines between reality and fiction, Sullivan realized in order to be a cult leader, he would need followers, a group of lost souls to be brought under the new Prince of Darkness. And this is where Sullivan began building his army. One of the first to join the Army of Darkness was Bob Roop, a former United States wrestling Olympian. When Roop joined the Army of Darkness, it represented something more than just another heel turn. It suggested that even the most disciplined, grounded athletes were susceptible to Sullivan's dark influence. Next, a longtime friend of Sullivan, Mark Lewin was repackaged as a brainwashed disciple who emerged from the ocean in one of wrestling's most famous vignettes, silent, naked but for red trunks, his eyes vacant. Sullivan called it his baptism into chaos. Sullivan renamed him the Purple Haze, who was portrayed as having no mind of his own, a spiritual zombie brought back by Sullivan's rituals. He was both the muscle and the warning, a visual representation of what happened to those who joined the army. Nancy Toffaloni was working as a model and in the wrestling merchandise business when she met Sullivan. He saw something in her presence: poise, charisma, and an intense look that could project mystery and danger. Rather than just adding her as a generic valet, Sullivan gave her a central role in the Army of Darkness storyline, crafting the character of the fallen angel, a beautiful woman who had turned her back on the light and now served the dark powers alongside the Prince of Darkness himself. Her look was unforgettable: heavy black eye makeup, cloaks, long dark hair, and an eerie calmness that contrasted with Sullivan's manic energy. She was a siren and a sorceress, representing both temptation and the price of giving into darkness. What set the Army of Darkness apart was its full commitment to tone and immersion. While other wrestling villains might cheat to win or boast arrogantly, Sullivan's approach was more psychological and surreal. His rhetoric borrowed from the Necronomicon, LaVeyan Satanism, and horror films of the era, creating a layered and cerebral darkness that few wrestling characters had dared to attempt. Ironically, his messages often alluded to the occult, witchcraft, hallucinogens, and even Satanism, but Sullivan always mentioned later in interviews that he never used the word Satan, and never brought actual religion into his promos. But of course, that did not stop the fans from believing that Sullivan was a devil worshipper, and his army was in Florida to bring their real evil to wrestling. When discussing the Army of Darkness after he retired, Sullivan credited the group's success to the babyfaces he went up against. The Army's most famous adversary was WWE Hall of Famer, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, the ultimate everyman. Rhodes, representing the light and working-class decency, was the perfect foil for Sullivan's shadowy rituals and otherworldly promos. Their feud became a moral battleground, and the intensity of the storyline led to some of the most violent and emotionally charged matches in CWF history. Sullivan's army also targeted second-generation star Mike Graham, whose father owned the company. This made the feud personal for fans. The idea was that Sullivan was not just turning friends against each other. He was trying to rewrite the legacy of Florida wrestling by purging its traditions and the Graham family. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the Army of Darkness was how committed Sullivan was to kayfabe. He never broke character in public, even at airports or restaurants. He wouldn't travel with babyfaces. He stayed in separate hotels. If he saw fans, he acted cold, distant, or menacing. There were rumors, untrue but effective, that Sullivan was a real Satanist. Fans would write angry letters to TV stations or try to ban him from appearing in certain areas. This was method acting on a regional wrestling budget, and it worked. People were genuinely afraid of Sullivan. Not in a boo, you're a bad guy sense, but in a this man might be dangerous sense. In a world where most wrestling fans still believed in wrestling, Sullivan brought it to another level. By the late 80s, the Florida territory was crumbling under Vince McMahon's national expansion. Kevin Sullivan left CWF and took his gimmick elsewhere. As the 90s arrived, the Army of Darkness dissolved, with its members going separate ways or retiring from wrestling altogether. Sullivan resurfaced as the Taskmaster, which brought back similar ideas of the Army of Darkness in WCW in the form of the Three Faces of Fear and the Dungeon of Doom. However, the groups were no longer edgy and fresh. These heel factions were tailored to a more fan-friendly audience. The Dungeon of Doom, often mocked today, was a cartoonish version of Sullivan's original vision. It had giants, mummies, and a guy named the Yeti. It was no longer a meditation on evil. It was a Halloween skit. But those who had seen the original Army remembered a time when wrestling blurred the lines between entertainment and spiritual warfare. Despite its relatively short run, the Army of Darkness left an indelible mark on wrestling history. It anticipated the rise of horror-themed factions and gimmicks like The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness and the Wyatt family. More importantly, it proved that wrestling could be more than just athletic competition. It could be atmospheric, philosophical, and artfully terrifying. Sullivan's character may not have won world titles, but he created a narrative so unsettling and immersive that it remains studied and celebrated decades later. In the modern era, where cinematic vignettes and character immersion are the standard, Sullivan's work stands as a haunting precursor. The Army of Darkness may have faded from television, but it lives on in every eerie promo, every corrupted babyface, and every faction that dares to whisper in tongues instead of screaming for titles.